So that's the most important thing with energy system development and looking at time motion demands is what do I need to do to prepare for this? Okay, what you're gonna see is different schools of thought when it comes to conditioning. Like with pitching in particular, there's a conditioning school of thought where it's like we need to be conditioned and do a whole ton of work all the time and do more and more. There's another side where people are saying, oh, this is a power activity. We don't need to be doing conditioning at all. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, and it comes down to having common sense. Honestly, I think people overthink this stuff, and also understanding that the sport is training. I don't do repeat power intervals with baseball and softball athletes ever because that's what a bullpen is. They're already doing it numerous times a week. Okay? If you are watching a practice and athletes are doing a lot of, let's say it's a soccer team and you're working on an attack strategy, or you're working on like chasing a ball down on the sideline, like someone, someone leads you. You've seen that play in soccer. Someone kicks it way downfield, an attacker sprints after it, and they're working on that in practice. Those are max velocity sprint exposures. That's what they are, okay? It's not like we go into our training week and we say we need to hit this a certain amount of times, and then we just ignore what's going on in practice and stick to that plan. On days where we sprint a ton, that gives me insight into what I should do the following days. Like they've already done this. When I was working in the Royal system with GPS, I used that data to dictate how much I would have guys run. Okay, sometimes guys would get a little less playing time. Now their acute to chronic workload ratio gets a little lower. Okay, meaning now they're getting desensitized to the actual demands of the game. So maybe you supplement for that guy, because if someone goes down and that guy needs to play more, he's got to be prepared. Now we're talking about like volume. Okay, so volume is another massive piece of this. And the factors that go into volume are frequency, magnitude, so how much in one bout, okay, and also intensity, and density in a single session. If you run 3 miles in 2 hours, that's way less demanding than running 3 miles in 22, 23 minutes, obviously. Frequency is, how often per week. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, what's happening in those days, and how much separation is there, between each day or between each training session. That's one thing to keep in mind. Ideally, the more spaced out things are, the more intense you would go. That's a general rule of thumb. So an extension of the frequency idea is that we have what are called frequency versus saturation-based programs. Okay? A saturation-based program is a program where we're doing more on one single day. So let's say you're only training on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, okay? Only 3 days of work. You're probably going to do a lot more on those days. But let's say we added a Tuesday session. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay, maybe you go low intensity Monday, then you do a lot more work on Tuesday, and then Wednesday, if you did a high intensity day on Tuesday, you can't do that again. So you would go low again on Wednesday. Okay, so like that, those scribbled lines kind of determine like how much work you're doing. And then Friday after a rest period and Wednesday's light day, you can go high again. Okay, so a frequency program is more suited for like very stressful periods, much more stressful periods of sport prep or you're in season. An example of that would be taking a microdosing approach for a baseball or softball team. Okay, if it were up to me, I would love to have athletes come in 4 days a week or 3 days a week in season and do less work each time they came in. And the reason for that is because when you do a saturation-based program, when you do a lot on one day, what happens? You're fatigued. Okay, and that fatigue trickles over into the following days, and it hurts the quality of the work over the following days. Especially in season when you're trying to really maximize the skill and the technical and tactical elements of sport prep, you need to be able to learn well, and fatigue and trying to learn skill and take on cognitive load as well, those things don't go great together. We learn best when we're fresh. And that's something to consider too as a strength coach who cares about the sport execution, is trying to decipher and understand how is my training negating the skill practice, or how is it negatively impacting their ability to learn. And that's why you need to be on the same page with your sports staff about when they're doing their most important stuff too. They have their big rocks as well. You can watch video and learn about, how another team might approach you offensively or defensively, or from a pitch, how is this team going to attack you pitching wise. You can watch video fatigued. Football players are getting on a bus after a Saturday game and they're watching film right away. You can still learn in that regard. I'm talking about learning at high speed. Where do you need to be on the field? How much separation do you need to create relative to where the opponent is? Where do you need to be in how much time, to actually execute a play properly? If you're working on bunt defense, it's not going to look great if you can't get to a bag in time and actually make the play. If a first baseman crashes in towards home plate to field a bunt, but you're playing second base and you can't get to first base fast enough, now you can't complete the play. So you want to have successful reps in practice, and you want to be fresh for that stuff. Okay, I firmly believe that successful reps in practice are going to help learning, but also bad reps. Failure is good, and you should kind of embrace it, but it shouldn't look sloppy and miserable. You know what I mean? That's what I'm talking about. Actual execution, and actually doing it live and fast. We want to be able to give athletes the opportunity to do that well, and with saturation-based programs, that could be hard. I talked about magnitude a little bit there too, right here, but intensity is another one. So with intensity, I'm going to mainly talk about high-speed running here, HSR. If you ever looked at GPS data, or you ever get the chance to, you're going to see that there are different velocity bands. So there's band 8, band 7, band 6, band 5. On Catapult GPS, high-speed running is triggered at around 12 miles per hour, unless you go in the system and you change it yourself, which I don't recommend. But velocity band 5 is on the lower end of it's 12 to 14 miles an hour. Band 6 is a little higher. You could also individualize velocity bands for athletes, but that takes a lot of data to do that accurately. But not all high-speed running is maximal effort running. Okay, so that's something to take into consideration as well. And I'll also give you a real example from our prep this past summer of how I kind of approached our speed work a little differently. If all the speed work that you do is band 7 and 8, the highest speed you can hit, and always trying to hit max outputs, you're not going to be prepared for the demands of the game. There are a couple other studies. There's a study by Freeston. I'll put that on the screen as well. And it looked at baseball running demands in the MLB. Now, their threshold for high-speed running was 75% of your max speed. Catapult is not that high, so the numbers are, you got to take them with a little bit of a grain of salt. If you look at the chart that's in that paper, you'll see the workload demands for outfielders, infielders. The demands for outfielders were a lot higher, naturally. Infielders was low. First baseman, catchers were the lowest. But within those running demands and the high-speed running demands, a lot of that happened on the submaximal end. And volume, like I said, is a huge predictor of injury. So to prepare athletes for the amount of high-speed running they're going to experience, you have to do submaximal work. You have to. And with our schedule, we were training on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay. We had a lift on Tuesday, lift on Thursday, lift on Friday. And then we did some, tempo on Thursday. We did speed work on Monday. We also did speed work on Friday before the lift. But I only have 1 day of submaximal running in there. When they get to practice, they're going to be doing submaximal running 5 days a week. It's not enough. So what I did this year was I added tempo to our Monday after our speed work to get them more submaximal running exposure. Now, generally, people will say you're confusing the body. You're giving it 2 different signals. You're doing conditioning work and speed work on the same day. And my rebuttal to that is not if I control the work to rest ratio. Okay, so that's why I kind of started with energy systems, because if you're trying to build speed or you're trying to build repeat sprint ability, like you have to have distinct days where you emphasize each one to get the best quality. If you really want to increase aerobic capacity, you can't do it on the same day you sprint. And that's going to hurt your sprinting ability, okay? But what that tempo running was, it was just build-up running, okay? It was a build-up where they hit about, 80 to 85% of their max speed, if I had to guess, based on the intensity I was telling them to operate at. But then they did a walking back rest. Walking rest. So the work, it was about 40 to 50 yards each rep. The work took about, I would say anywhere from 5 to 6 or 7 seconds. But then the rest was about, 45 seconds to a minute. Okay, so when you look at it like that, that's borderline lactic right there. Okay, if you have a 5-second work period doing a build-up out to 40 yards, 40, 50 yards, 5 to 7 seconds, you're resting about 10 to 12 times the work period. So that's not a conditioning effect, an aerobic conditioning effect right there. I'm just building elastic volume and tolerance to manage ground contacts. I'm probably going to do that every year from now on. It was probably the best iteration or modification I've ever made to my programming as far as getting athletes more prepared for what practice is going to expect of them. That's one of the more meaningful things, even more so than the lifting. Because what they're preparing most for in practice is running, honestly. Now you obviously want to raise physical outputs, but from an injury perspective, that's a huge element. And I'll finish with this, and we'll expand on this next week. Got about 1 minute and 15 seconds left. Is that conditioning is not reserved to just aerobic work. The term strength and conditioning coach is an oxymoron. And this is just a philosophical mind shift you have to have when you're thinking about everything going on. Conditioning is everything you do. The definition of the word condition is to prepare something or someone to fit the demands of a task, okay? Which encapsulates everything that we do. And when you adopt that lens and you filter everything through that, you start to look at everything as training. You start to look at everything as conditioning, okay? And when you look at everything as conditioning, you start to make better decisions with how much you should devote to one area versus another, okay? If I'm trying to build change of direction with athletes, and I see that practice involved, working on rundowns for 30 minutes. You guys know what a rundown is, okay? Working on rundowns, what does the base runner do at least 3 to 4 times during a rundown? They change direction, okay? So if they're getting that numerous times a week when they work on, technical and tactical, defensive positioning and base running, I don't feel like I need to do more of that. you know, unless I see technical breakdowns that need to be worked on that are going to make people more efficient in like evading a rundown and getting back to a base, you know, that's important. Now we're talking about raising the ability to have like, you know, lateral eccentric strength and cut and stop your body mass on a dime. That's different. But doing more volume is what I'm saying might not be the most important thing because they've already gotten that signal. If we are working on cutting balls off in the gap, you know, coaches are hitting balls in the gap, and ideally, if you're an outfielder, you want to cut that ball off so it doesn't get to the wall. Because if it gets to the wall, base runner has a better chance of hitting a triple instead of a double or even a single. If you're fast enough to cut it off and get it in, you might hold the runner to a single. That affects the game. Now, if they're sprinting, they're hauling ass into the gap, like those are accelerations. So I'm taking that into consideration when I'm designing each week on its own. And that's why each week is its own piece. We started with this in week 1 when I said you need to program in very short blocks so that you're more attuned to what's happening right in front of you. Because when you write something on paper, just as human beings, we're more inclined to leave it and not want to change it. And that's what I think coaches struggle with most is they just want to live by the plan and adhere to it. And they're not reactive enough and not creative enough to know, okay, we've done a ton of sprinting. We don't need to do more. What can I replace with this? What I would replace with it is more, you know, isometrics. What happens when you sprint a ton? You beat up tendons. You get a lot of impact. You get sore, okay? You break down tissues. Your nervous system is depleted, okay? ISOs are a great way to, one, restore tendon function, restore central nervous system function, help you recover a little better, and they're low impact and they're not going to contribute more to your soreness. You know, even if you do loaded ISOs, like you're not going to get sore from it as much as you would by going through a full range of motion squat or you know, doing Bulgarian split squats and things like that. So knowing how many tools you have in your toolbox to accomplish the same thing based on what you're seeing is super, super important.